Good evening, everyone. This is Dennis Stone, Director of the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice at the Jacksonville Urban League. Tonight, we're having one of our series of racial healing and reconciliation conversations. And tonight, it's going to be led by Nyasia Harris, who is reflecting on a document published by the National Urban League focused on the state of Black America. The National Urban League has published documents under this name for many years. And of course, given the changes in, I would say, governance in America, both national, state, and local, this question is just as important as ever, what the state of Black America is. And I'm not an African American. I can't respond from that perspective, but we do have I would call her our Master of Ceremonies, Nyasia Harris, who will be asking questions, and perhaps we can get her to say a few things. We also have, she is an intern at the center, as well as Yuthika Sathyan and Daniel Peter, who's also with us, and Sadia Barge, who's director of the internship program. I should say a couple of words about the internship program. We attract students from all over the country who are interested in social justice, equity and public health, and other areas within the broad term of social justice. And they bring some really extremely intelligent foci on the topics that we work on at the Urban League. And we're grateful to have this group with us tonight. So I'm going to actually ask Barge, whether she has any comments before we get started.
So I do want to say thank you all and welcome to our racial healing and reconciliation talk. And although we are discussing the state of Black America, that is not what it's all about when we're talking about racial healing and reconciliation in general. It is something so that everyone can have an understanding of our differences and how they bring us closer together. So tonight, as our amazing interns have this conversation and moderate our conversation, I would love to have some feedback and input. Hopefully, we have some more guests join us over the course of the night. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nyasia Harris. Thank you so much for your amazing work on this program and our other panelists as well. So thank you, and I'll go ahead and start.
Thank you, Dennis and Sadia. I'm happy to be here tonight. So today we're going to be discussing the 49th Annual State of Black America article that the National Urban League publishes annually. So the 49th Annual State of Black America warns that U.S. democracy is in a crisis with systemic changes in civil rights, voting rights, and equity initiatives. The Urban League warns that U.S. democracy and civil rights are facing their most serious threats since Reconstruction. The Urban League calls this a state of emergency and highlights both threats and resistance efforts. Some of the key themes that were discussed in the report are the erosion of voting rights, the war on woke and DEI, the radicalization of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, digital censorship and misinformation, and resistance from opposers such as the states, the National Urban League, and the NAACP to these changes and why DEI matters for democracy. Some of the National Urban League's current initiatives include the 21 Pillars for Public Safety, their police reform idea, the Empowerment 2.0, which focuses on the 3Ds: defending democracy, demanding diversity, and defeating poverty. They've created the Fair Budget Coalition, which advocates for budget and public policy initiatives that address systemic social, racial, and economic equality and legal challenges against anti-equity executive actions. And so for this town hall, it's really going to be discussion-based, and it's some questions based on the article, but you didn't have to read the article before viewing or coming to the town hall tonight. And so with my first question, what does the report mean when it says that America is in a state of emergency for democracy? So what are some parallels do you see between Reconstruction and Jim Crow today? And what do you think the National Urban League meant when they said that America's in a state of emergency?
Well, I guess I'll get started. It would seem to me that I can't help but bring up the problem that some people have as we have evolved as a country and become more diverse. I think there is a certain amount of fear that people have that somehow they'll lose their position of power, or they'll be, from an economic standpoint, be impacted by people of color. And so there are those, and that's where the similarity to me comes in with Jim Crow, is there are those that take advantage of those fears and the desire for some people to feel better than others, and have suddenly found it a very bad thing to focus on diversity, encouraging understanding of each other, all of which kind of falls under the DEI moniker. And so in essence, there's a lot of similarity with Jim Crow, because that part of that, and I can't even get very deep into it because I didn't experience it all, and don't in the way people still do today, that people of color. But it seems to me that there is a challenge to again have this notion of I need to feel better than somebody else, and that fear is significantly being stoked by some individuals who are using it to be successful in their taking power, I guess. Hope I'm making some sense, but Peter, Daniel.
Yeah. No, I agree, definitely. I think there's a bit of a culture war going on. And in one of my classes we talk about what's like a cause for increasing polarization, and one of those like one of the things that political scientists strongly attribute to that is the culture war, and how there's an increasing number of people who see people of color as sort of that population rising as like a threat to their existence, to their and to their ability to get a job and stuff, right? So that's the point you made, and I think that's very true. And I think another parallel I see compared to like the Jim Crow era and stuff like that is there's an increasing, I think social media is largely a cause of this. I think there's an increasing number of people who are trying to legitimize kind of racist views today. They're trying to misrepresent statistics and facts. To say DEI is wrong, DEI is taking away opportunities from white people, and they're not really getting into the actual facts behind anything. They're not talking about the historic and systemic discrimination against Black people and other minority groups, and I think that's very dangerous. And they're radicalizing other people over that. And like for me personally, like I know people that have fell into that train of thought and have literally stopped talking to me because they really believe that stuff. And no matter what you say, they won't listen. That's very dangerous.
And just to add another point, when we're thinking about the word democracy, we're talking about the power being invested into the people and being public policy being made based off of elected officials, but it's for the public. And a lot of times in public policy and in law, like there's issues when the people who are representing aren't the people who are represented. And so something that Dennis mentioned is that, like, again, he can't understand my perspective as a Black person because he hasn't had that experience. And I can't understand his perspective as a white person because I haven't had that experience. But when we're taking away DEI, we are taking away the representation from the people who actually need it. And then as a majority of the time, we have an oversaturation of this group thinking. We had a speaker not too long ago, Tami Hodo, who was talking about group thinking and how those people in power are just like trying to hold on to that power just by like we're going to all think the same. And so definitely when we're talking about separating individuals based off of race and how that impacts people or it impacts their experiences, it really takes away from the fact that we're all equal, that we all deserve the opportunity. For me personally, I can even like it's kind of different. I'm not sure if anyone well, I'm not sure if Nyasia will understand me, but when I think about race, like when I think about Black people in it particularly, sometimes it's like there's different shades of Black. Because you can have Black people who are from the hood, you can have Black people from suburban, you can have Black people who grew up in the city, who grew up in the country, and they all have different experiences and they're all represented differently, especially when we're looking into policy, when we're looking into voting, when we're looking into even healthcare access. So when we're looking across the board, even though they're all on the lower end, there's still varying levels of issues. But reinvesting that power into the people because not everyone isn't, not all Black people have have been stripped of so much of civilization that they can't or have like meaningful voices, meaningful stories, and meaningful positions when it comes to trying to figure out what's going on. Because a lot of times we do see, like Daniel was mentioning, that people are framing African Americans or Black people or anyone of color as villainous or evil or anything like that, that they're automatically not intelligent or something like that, when that's not really the case. And it is a large part based off of like social media, how news portray people and how information is being shared. Because again, if we don't have these views of different sides, like how health access and all these different things are affected by those policies that are put in place by people who do not care about those people of color, then you'll never get to understand what the true impact is. And so there's just a lot of people suffering that's contributing to the state of emergency, just to bring it back.
And the National Urban League really frames it as more than a declaration, but a warning that serious principles of democracy and institutions are under threat. And it's not just the Urban League, it's multiple civil rights groups, political science, and individuals talking about the erosion of norms and abuse of power that we're seeing with the executive branch and the erosion of checks and balances, and just decline in integrity and fairness in our democracy and society. So we touched on the theme of DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why they have become a major target for political and legal attacks. I'm wondering how you might think the rollback of DEI affects the workforce, education, and civil engagement in the long term. For example, we had the recent suit for the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard in 2023, which the Supreme Court decided that race-based affirmative action programs in most college admissions violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Fourth Amendment. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on why DEI may affect the workforce and education in the long term.
Well, I think you're going to see it fairly quickly happen. Part of it, what is sad is that, to me, the inclusion part, which is kind of built on the equity and the diversity, is that, to me, we recognize diversity in these DEI efforts. The diversity exists, and it requires people to understand the differences so that we can ensure that equality is protected, as well as understanding. And that's the part that's wrapped up into the I of inclusion. And I was around before all of you were born, and I saw Jim Crow in its heyday, and I watched changes happen that brought us together, nowhere near where it should be, but definitely changed things economically, socially, had huge impact. I remember seeing I think it was called Star Trek. It was a series on television about these people in the future going to different planets, and one of the episodes had these aliens that were they were from the same planet, and they looked pretty much the same. They had stripes on their bodies, but they somehow they couldn't get along, and so somebody asked them, well, what is it that you don't like about the other person? And they said, well, don't you see? Don't you see? And what it was their stripes went a different direction. And to me, that's what I just don't get it sometimes when people
get right up DCUs. See, most of us were taught to lift as you climb, but clearly some have forgotten to lift as they climb, and now they are committed.
I'm sorry, who is that? I couldn't quite understand what you're saying. I'm not sure who that was speaking.
No one was speaking. Someone came in with their audio on. That was all.
Oh, I see. Okay. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you, and that was me. That had my audio on.
Okay. I thought maybe, when we first started these, and it's not to say they won't happen in the future or even to, but these conversations, we used to have Zoom bombers or whatever they used to call them, and they would come.
Oh, yeah.
So it sounded a little bit like that.
Okay.
But to me, it's a shame. You know, I kind of, you know, obviously the Urban League wants to go very deeply on this, but to me, you just come to this threshold of it. You go, wow, this is so sad. You know, we really had worked on ways to help people understand one another. Different projects, different centers in universities and companies, and people really working hard to understand one another. And it was working well. And I think it's a shame that this has happened. There are other, you know, we're about halfway through, and there are some other topics on your list, Aisha, that you may want to cover, but I just, again, I think it's just sad that that this has come to pass in the way it has. It's got nothing, to me, it's got nothing to do with DEI. It has to do with political power. That's and I guess to answer your question, finally, it is very important for democracy. It does matter, because when we talk about demo, we mean all people as a pluralistic society, and what better way to live in a peaceful, wonderful world than to get to know one another and to build on each other's strengths. So
Thank you, Dennis, for your input. So switching gears, another topic that the report focused on is the impact on voting. Some recent court rulings, such as Selby versus Holder in 2013 and the Students for Fair Admissions 2023, have weakened protections of voting, opening the door for disenfranchisement through gerrymandering, language access restriction, and limits on mail-in and early voting. Shelby versus Holder in 2013 struck down the core provision of the Voting Rights Act that enabled federal election oversight in select jurisdictions. What do you think the impact on voting will be after looking at the previous year's election? And in what ways do these restrictions on mail-in voting, early voting, or language access have disproportionately or will disproportionately affect certain populations?
That's definitely going to affect a lot of people because there's a lot of disabled people in America. And that's pretty much based off of America's health system because it doesn't protect, it doesn't prevent, it's people from getting hurt and things like that. And so when you're looking at health statistics across specific communities, so for instance, African Americans, when you're looking at that quality of life or disability lived years or the years lived with disability is a lot larger for communities of color, and it's because of the impact of the different things that they had to do over the course of their lifetime. So when we're talking about where they work most often African American people and other people of color are working in more physically demanding jobs, which lead to worse health outcomes, which leads to more disability in the later years of life. So whereas someone may experience the last 2 years, you have 10 to 15 years where they're just maybe homebound, unable to get around on their own, rely heavily on support. And so at that point, you have a lot of people who are going to stop voting. And then when you break it down and look into the ages, thinking about that's where a lot of the population is voting, is the older African American people or the older Black people are the ones that are voting. So when we're taking away that, it's weakening the Black vote overall or lessening it.
And you're correct, Sadia. Recent studies have shown that in states like Texas and Georgia, non-white voters, mail-in ballots, and applications are rejected at significantly higher rates than those of white voters. And in Georgia, laws limiting drop boxes have disproportionately affected communities of color, particularly those with low vehicle ownership. So we really see this impacting voters of color and the elderly, as many senior citizens are on fixed incomes and vote by mail, which serves as a convenient way of then traveling to a polling place, or if they're disabled, it is an
Or even if
alternative.
they have to work.
Yeah,
Like if they're stuck in their job, if they're stuck doing things and don't have the flexibility, because if you think about it, like if you have more money, then you might have more time access or more flexibility. But if you are stuck in one of those jobs where you're at the very bottom, I'm not giving you time off. Like it really affects a lot of people in different ways. And it's just like there's so many traps that Black people can fall into just based off of these restrictions.
and I like that you mentioned, even considering the people who have jobs they really rely on to make ends meet to live, which is a right everyone should be afforded. It makes me think of just having basic childcare, to be able to go vote in time to take off work, that a lot of Americans don't have the privilege of, especially individuals in marginalized communities. Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to add?
And this is largely the focus on voting.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we've had voting experts on in our town halls, our virtual town halls, for several years, probably as many as 5 years now. And all the experts say that when you start manipulating the ability of people to get access under the guise of security, you end up restricting the ability of people to vote. And this paper doesn't. There's far more going on behind the scenes that the whole purging cycles, the excluding a vote because when you signed up to vote, you put a dash in your name. And then when you signed to actually vote, you didn't use the dash. And it turns out it makes it a lot more difficult for Hispanic voters because they have different ways of spelling their names. There's just culturally there's a difference. And it was a way that, people that wanted to exclude Hispanics came up with this way of evaluating signatures and saying that they weren't valid. That's just one example of the many trivial things that have been done. And I agree with you, just completely disregarding the challenges people have in their daily lives to just put food on the table and then make it and use that to make it difficult for people to vote by limiting mail-in ballots and things like that.
I
And
would
go ahead.
I was gonna also say, when you add in the perspective, so you already have this daily stress and trauma, and you don't feel represented by government, you don't feel represented by the people who are supposed to represent you, and now you're adding more restrictions. Now it's gonna make it even harder. So like it's compounding on itself, where you're having more and more problems that pushes the gap between Black people in power further and further away from each other.
Yes.
So we've talked a lot about how DI anti-initiatives and voting laws that have been restrictive have impacted the United States on a national scale. I was wondering, what do you think the impact has been or will be in Florida and in Jacksonville? Some current laws that have passed in Florida have been the Senate Bill 266, which has significantly limited DEI programs in public universities and states under this law, and state and federal funds cannot be used for DEI initiatives. Programs that promote differential or preferential treatment on basis like race, sex are prohibited.
Well, just more of the same. Chilling effect on free speech. You know, what defines differential or preferential treatment? How do you know when something is being done that could be seen as differential or preferential? So that makes people not want to even broach the topic, walk away from it, and thus we become less effectively diverse. We lose understanding, and we lose the ability to dialogue because everybody's afraid to say anything to lose their jobs. Look how quickly people got fired because they said something that was interpreted as wrong, very subjectively, about a recent the Kirk killing. And in fact, it seems about every other day we get something new. The latest is that the Trump administration wants the universities to sign a pact with them that in which the universities guarantee that they will align their and now I don't want to become somebody who's misstating, but it would appear that they're saying that their curriculum has to mirror what the conservative agenda is, and I think the word conservative was in this compact. But it just makes people afraid to speak up and to talk about things like the unfairness of current voting efforts to block voting and things like that. So.
And I think it's also important to consider that Florida itself, as well as Jacksonville, has one of the largest Black populations, like, and that's compared to the rest of the states. I mean, rest of the counties, or the rest of the cities in the state, as well as the rest of the states in the country. So when you're talking about people who are disproportionately affected, or areas that are disproportionately affected, Jacksonville and Florida will definitely be on that list. And given the history, there's going to be a lot more issues. And then they're going to be looking like, well, what's going on? It's just, the Black people's fault. But when you're creating more and more stress on these people, where are they to turn? What is there to do? How we're supposed to help ourselves when we can't even help ourselves. And so that's definitely going to be an issue.
Have you guys ever seen like that one gerrymandered district that was just like a giant line in the middle of Florida, and that basically just like covered this one whole like Black population, just to kind of suppress their vote into one like House seat, so that the conservatives could get more power in like the Florida, I think the Florida House, I think the Florida House, or maybe Congress, I don't know. But yeah, just to suppress the vote of the Black community. And with regards to this, I mean, I just thought that was an interesting point, and how they're literally blatantly targeting that kind of thing. But there's that, and I mean, with respect to DEI initiatives and schools and stuff. Look, I don't have the exact statistics, right? But say like the poverty rate, for example, right? It's like right here amongst the Black community and like minority, like people of color communities, right? It's like right here or right here compared to like the white community, like I mean various white communities, which is like down here, right? Poverty rate amongst people of color is much higher because of like systemic discrimination, right? And we're trying to fix that by DEI initiatives to get more people from historically discriminated communities, historically oppressed communities into school, and to represent them and make these places more friendly for everybody, you know, more understanding. And they're attacking that at its roots, and they're neglecting that there's um, a disproportionate like poverty rate and stuff. And so, I mean, we have to, I mean, ultimately we're gonna have to do our part to spread awareness on people that are going to want to listen. But, you know, there are a lot of people that are neglecting those basic facts, you know, and yeah, I mean, ultimately that issue, that problem with what we're seeing among the rates, it's just, you know, it's gonna stay the same or become worse without like these DEI initiatives, which has been the main, like even the DEI initiatives that we've had so far wasn't enough, right? And now they're just gonna make it worse.
So we've talked a lot today about the attack on voting rights, undermining democracy's legitimacy, and framing DEI as anti-white or unfair and a strategy to erase progress and reinforce systemic exclusion. When civil rights enforcement is weakened, discrimination goes unchecked. And we've seen the attack on resistance, but resistance is legal, political, and grassroots. Building coalitions is essential to defending democracy. And I just want to know, what is your hope for democracy in the United States in the future as a member of the Jacksonville Urban League?
Well, I would say that then I'm going to ask Julia Henry Wilson to respond to that. But I would say the future, hopefully.
I'm sorry, Dennis. What did you want me to respond to?
Oh, Nyasia was saying that when civil rights enforcement is weakened, discrimination goes unchecked, resistance is legal, political, and grassroots. Building coalitions is essential to defending democracy. The fight for equity is not abstract. It requires individual and collective action. The question is, what do you see for the future of democracy given the attack on DEI?
Well, I see where we really need to collectively, band together to make sure that this does not go away. I mean, look how long we fought to get it to begin with. And I think I agree that collectively we need to present a united front and, stand up for what it is that we would really like to have, stand up for what we feel is right. One of the things that I have that disturbs me is because of the fact that we've remained silent. Now, I don't believe in arguing and, trying to bully somebody or something like that. So we have remained silent in all of these things that are going on in hopes that they will come to their senses and realize that this is not the way to go. And we've never been like the people that they think we are. We're not those backwoods animals that we're going to forever fight and attack and all of those things. So no matter how much they march, how much they say, how much they do, we remain who we are. And I think eventually I'm hoping that for the future, they will see that and realize that it's not all about one person trying to rule over everybody else, but that we can truly be at some point equal. It took us a long time to even be able to speak that word, equality and all of those things. So I'm hoping that somebody will definitely come to their senses and see, does it really matter about the color or about the height or about the size or the the width or any of that stuff, the money, that we can be a people as people. That's what I'm hoping to see for the future. And if it's not with us, definitely our generations that are coming behind us will pick up, that sword and fight for those rights that we've earned and that we should have. So I see it being more of a kinder, gentler, group of people at some point. I'm not sure what point, but I'm hoping that it'll get to that.
Yes.
I don't know how anyone can follow up with such thoughtful words. Like, I really do want to echo everything you said, Ms. Wilson, because that was amazing. I couldn't have said anything better or can't even add to that.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, just a reminder, we started out moving in the direction that Julia Henry Wilson said. By the way, Julia is director of our Center for Education, Career Services, and Career Development and Workforce Services, and does a lot of work with people who are struggling because of inequality and barriers. But it's ironic that we started out trying to bring equality so that people of color could have the same access to education, economics, et cetera. Along the way, and it'd be interesting to know when this DEI term came about, I think we discovered that all people needed an understanding of each other. And within that context, you understand how to improve equality. Because you can't just say, oh, okay, everybody's equal and walk away. It doesn't work. You need to understand differences, and of course there are varying degrees depending on what part of the country you're in and what background you had, et cetera. And along the way, I think scientists and experts came up with this combination of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a way to significantly improve our ability to get along and work together as we were put on this earth to do. And I guess I'm kind of coming full circle to where I began, and it's just such a shame that this is being done. But it's, to me, it's something that evolved from everybody's contribution to this, and by throwing it out, we set ourselves back decades in our ability to address these issues head on in a way that's quite constructive. Well, Nyasia, what else do you have for us?
So that's the end of our town hall for today. I just want to appreciate everyone for their very thorough and expansive discussion on all of the questions and topics that we talked about today. I have shared the National Urban League's report on the state of Black America in the chat if anyone wanted to give it a read in their spare time. But I just want to thank everyone for their participation in today's event.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League, thank you, Nyasia and Sadia, for putting this together, and Daniel for your engagement, Yuthika and Miss Julia Henry Wilson for attending and
Okay.
providing us your perspective.
Okay, thank you so much. I have enjoyed it, and sometimes I get confused as to what day it is. I listen to Jocelyn's podcast, then I say, am I supposed to be listening to this one this week too? So sometimes I get confused, and so I apologize for being late, but I enjoyed
We
what
definitely
I've heard.
appreciate your support. And thank
Yeah.
you again,
Okay.
Nyasia.
All right,
Yes,
thank you.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night,
All right.
everybody.
Good
Good
see you
night,
guys.
night.
everyone.
Thank you.